Welcome to TBN Israel, the podcast. Today we're going to talk about the threat to Israel posed by the Hezbollah organization in Lebanon.
That's right, Yair. The northern border of Israel has never been more tense, and the preparation level, the readiness level in the Israeli army and Hezbollah hasn't been this high in a very, very long time.
No, people don't talk about it enough, but missiles are being launched from Lebanon towards Israel on almost a daily basis. The streets of the Israeli communities adjacent to the border became ghost towns. And every day, more missiles, drones, anti-tank and sniper attacks are being planned and orchestrated against the Israeli troops by the Hezbollah militants in Lebanon. This is a potential of escalating the whole region with this war. Basically, this organization is the flagship of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps.
Yeah.
This is a terrorist organization, but it has the capability and the strength of almost an army.
Yeah.
It has experience. It fought against Syria. It is trained. It has the military capability, the technological ability to really cause significant damage against Israel. And we'll dive deeper into these aspects to understand who is this organization, Hezbollah, who is behind it, what's its goals, and we'll try to go into the mind of its leader, Hassan Nasrallah.
That's right. Today we're going into this story, which is at the moment the biggest threat that Israel faces, the most existential or close to existential threat, the largest threat to the daily life of Israeli citizens, the largest threat to casualties on both the civilian and military side of Israel, and the biggest powder keg in the Middle East at the moment, which is the Hezbollah. And the reason we're talking about it today is because it hasn't been leading the news. Hamas, Gaza has been leading the news. Hamas, if you look at the number of combatants, the level of threat it poses both for Israel and the Middle East, is now a lesser threat than Hezbollah is.
No, definitely. And if this war really ignites, at the moment it's punches between Israel and Hezbollah, but if this becomes a full-on war, and if the IDF starts maneuvering into Lebanon, this can ignite the entire Middle East and can involve the United States, it can involve Russia, it can involve Iran and other regional players that will cause the whole world to get drawn into this region.
Yeah. So
that's today, an opening. Yeah?
That's our opener. We have a fascinating show today. We're here for yet another podcast of the TBN Israel podcast. And today we're talking Hezbollah. And I want to remind our viewers, our listeners, that the reason we do this is because it takes more than a short segment to really get a deep understanding of what's happening here in the Middle East. And today we're breaking down one of the most significant players of terrorism, of violence that faces Israel, and one of the most significant actors in the Middle East as far as it relates to Iran. We're going to go into the history of this organization, into their capabilities, into the history of their warfare with Israel, and into the significance of what that looks like for our country today.
Yeah, and how it affects you back at home, if it's in the United States, in Europe, basically all over the region, because whatever happens in the Middle East always reaches the ends of the earth.
Yeah. And maybe we start sort of with the background. You know, we always dive deep into the facts. Let's explain who Hezbollah is. And we'll start with the MO, the modus operandi, of who these people are. And I think it's important to remember this, and we were talking before the show, it's important to remember how players operate. Israel is a democracy that runs a conventional army, that runs conventional, let's call it intelligence organizations, both secretive and known to the world, and with all of that, our enemies are the exact opposite of that. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. It's a terrorist organization that now is embedded into a society, into the people of Lebanon, but it still uses guerrilla warfare tactics to operate. It's not a regular army in the way we imagine a regular army.
And let's start it even wider. Hezbollah is the largest terrorist organization in the world today. It's the biggest military force in terms of terrorism. It has the biggest funding, which is close to $1 billion a year that is funded by Iran to Hezbollah. It is also one of the largest smugglers of drugs, also in the Middle East, also in other places in the world. It has various aspects of gaining financial income. And it is also heavily involved in the government in Lebanon.
Yeah.
So it's also a political actor in a country.
And I think that might be confusing for people.
Yeah, let's start maybe where is Lebanon?
Okay, so let's zoom out to this region. Israel has two northern neighbors, Syria and Lebanon. And Lebanon was, and we're talking mostly about Lebanon and Hezbollah within Lebanon today, although they're involved also in Syria and elsewhere. Lebanon was, keyword being was, a multinational, multi-religious country before Hezbollah sort of came into the world.
Beirut was the Paris of the Middle East.
Yeah, that's what it used to be known for. Beirut, the cities of Lebanon, were tourism destinations, not only for Arabs, but also for Europeans. And it was a country with a mixed population of Shia Muslims, of Sunni Muslims, of small minorities, of Christian Arabs at a great number.
And Druze.
And Druze, thank you. And that country went through years, and at this point it's decades, of civil war, that at the end of which much of the Christian population of that country left, which is a never-ending trend in the Middle East. Christianity, let's call it, in Arab countries has a very, very hard time surviving through civil war cycles, anywhere under ISIS and any time before that. And Hezbollah is an organization that was founded in the early 80s as a Shia, and this is specifically important, a Shia military and then political movement in Lebanon.
Yeah, Shia, basically Iran, is the leader of the Shiites in the world, in the Muslim world. And then Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Sunnis in the Muslim world. Sunnis and Shiites do not like each other, to say
That's an understatement.
Like, understatement. Basically, they're at war since the beginning of the Muslim world. It's different ideologies of Islam. And the one thing they have in common sometimes is they want to destroy Israel. So that is kind of something that unites them. That's why we see Hamas, which is a Sunni organization, being supported by Iran, which is a Shiite organization.
And I think the history here really helps understand how far back this history goes. Hezbollah is officially founded in 1982 as a replacement to a previous organization supported by Iran. The Iranian government, so that we think about that timeline, the Iranian Revolution, so overthrowing the Shah, which was to a certain degree a puppet of Western powers. The previous governor of Iran, that's in the late 70s. And then you have the Ayatollah regime that starts in Iran, again, still late 70s, 78, 79. And by 82, they're already influencing Lebanon. So they were very, very quick to export their ideology, very quick to export their terrorism. And they start a terrorist organization called Hezbollah. And it starts as a student movement, and then immediately starts also weaponizing and training combatants. And they pay them from the get-go, and this is important to understand, they're paid by the Iranian government. So they never waited, the Iranians. You can never understand Hezbollah without Iran. They were never a grassroots movement. They were never like a volunteer movement. They were always a professional terrorism sort of outreach arm of the Iranian government, and later on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in this part of the country. And from the get-go, their goal was one of two, or twofold. First, Shia Islam. Like you said, this is a huge, huge battle in the Muslim world over the sort of two big power centers: Sunni Islam, Shia Islam. And they're always fighting. A lot of the tension between Saudi and the Iranians roots back to that Shia-Sunni tension. Saudis, of course, are Sunni. The Iranians are Shia Muslims.
And definitely. And now, at the moment, they have grown more and more also in experience, because Hezbollah has been fighting in the Syrian civil war. They have been fighting against ISIS and other militants in Syria. So they have actual battle experience that most terrorist organizations don't have in the organized levels. So they are very organized, and they have some structure that resembles a real army. Okay, they're still a terrorist organization. They still operate, and their goals are to cause fear and terror amongst the civilian population of Israel and of the surrounding countries, including the Sunni minorities in Lebanon or other minorities there, because that's how they operate. And in terms of military capability and military power, at the moment they have over 150,000 missiles. Okay, some of them can reach the northern cities of Israel or northern military bases of Israel, and some of them can even reach Eilat, which is the southernmost city of Israel. So they basically can reach all the country of Israel with suicide drones or missiles.
Yeah.
That's only one part of their military capability.
Yeah.
Another arm is the Radwan forces, which is kind of like the elite commando forces.
It's the Navy SEALs for Hezbollah.
For Hezbollah, yeah. So these are the commandos, and they are stationed a few kilometers away from the Israel border. And they have the ability to mobilize really quickly, go on motorcycles and other small vehicles, off-road vehicles, and basically take over some Israeli communities adjacent to the border and keep them for a certain time. That's their goal, basically to cause some terror, kind of similar like what Hamas did in the communities surrounding the Gaza Strip, but they have a wider ability to do it because they have thousands
of highly trained,
highly
seasoned warriors.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, a very interesting fact to sort of delay on, is we, nowadays, I'd say, 7 months into the war, 7.5 months into the war, when we think to October 7th, in Israel now, there's this big discussion about, who's to blame for the failure down south. Yeah. And a lot of sort of the history of that roots back to the fact that on the morning of October 7th, the biggest threat to Israel in everyone's mind was Hezbollah.
Hezbollah in the north.
And Hezbollah in the north. And everyone was expecting the Hamas move to be sort of the preemptive attack to a Hezbollah move.
To launch a wider war.
Much of the military reserves that were called in, yourself included, several members of my family also included, weren't sent to the Gaza Strip.
No.
They were sent straight up north, anticipating a full-on strike from Hezbollah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think this is where Hezbollah is a very unique and interesting organization. I hate to say this, use the word interesting, but they really are, in the sense that they're many different things. They're both a grassroots terrorist organization. They're embedded inside villages, so they have, like a guy in his house with a weapon, a sniper rifle, an assault rifle, an RPG, and maybe a missile in his basement. Yeah. And also several of his neighbors do. But at the same time, they're also a highly trained guerrilla attack force, the Radwan force, which is, from what we know, is a highly trained, highly equipped, highly seasoned fighting mobile unit that we've always been concerned with, the IDF at least for quite a few years, that they were going to try to take over communities in northern Israel, and they're very open about stating that is their goal. Yeah. And then on top of that, they have the missile threat. So they're also a strategic threat to the nation of Israel and other countries in the region, which we need to think about. They have the ability to attack Syria if they wanted. They have the ability to scare Lebanon, Lebanon in the non-Hezbollah areas. Yeah. And they have the ability to threat any part of Israel. They've used in the first Lebanon War, or second Lebanon War, in 2006, they used long-range ground-to-sea missiles against Israeli Navy ships. So they have that strategic element to them. And then on top of that, they're also a political movement. And they sort of did this transition from we're just located and centered in southern Lebanon
into all of the country.
And to now we also want to be a political party. I'd say that's probably a place where they've succeeded to a much lesser degree than in the military area. But they're really a complex organization in understanding how deeply embedded they are in the society. And it also goes back to how complex Lebanon is as a country. As far as population, Hezbollah, and this is sort of like a side note, Hezbollah in recent years has had several violent clashes with villages in southern Lebanon attacking Hezbollah.
Because they're not Shiites.
Because they're Christian minorities who are saying, we don't want anything to do with you.
That makes sense, because what happens once Hezbollah is in your village? That village becomes a target for the IDF.
Yeah.
So this is something also that the news is not talking about, that because of all this fighting and the war that we have with Hezbollah since the 8th of October, one day after the 7th of October actually, is that the southern population of Lebanon is also being evacuated to the northern parts because of the ongoing battle between Israel and Hezbollah. So wherever Hezbollah is launching from, Israel is retaliating and destroying either that house, either that village, either that terror tunnel, which is another huge aspect we didn't mention. If we saw terror tunnels in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah has like underground cities almost of tunnels in the northern part of Israel, which is solid rock.
Yeah.
It's not like Gaza that is sand. They have advanced capabilities, and they hired the North Koreans to develop and dig these sophisticated, super advanced tunnels.
Attack tunnels.
Yeah. Crossing from Hezbollah, from Lebanon into Israel, and the IDF discovered a few of those, as well as inside Lebanon, in order to operate, hide their missiles, deliver their weapons, militants, and other equipment in order to wage a war against the Jewish state. So the levels of the threat is like a lot more advanced than what we had in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, let's put a word about the terrain in northern Israel. And I think this is important for our viewers. If you're imagining the Hezbollah warfare to be anything similar to Hamas, it's completely different. Hamas, the southern border of Israel, is sand or limestone-based rock, sediment rock. It's soft, there's a lot of sand everywhere. It's mostly flat-ish, rolling hills at most. Hezbollah is the exact opposite of that. It's very hard rock, bedrock in many places, magma-based or lava-based rock. Very steep, I call it dramatic terrain, high mountains, deep valleys. So the entire warfare there, and this is very important for the identity and the nature of warfare with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has capitalized heavily over decades, or since the 80s, over 4 decades at this point. They've heavily capitalized over the difficulty of fighting in a mountainous terrain. And it's not only mountainous, it's also brush-covered mountainous terrain.
Brush-covered mountainous?
Yeah, so you're under a canopy of trees or bushes.
Okay,
so you're fighting svach. You're fighting in a very thick forest in very steep terrain. So whatever advantage you had as a mobilized army, tanks moving quickly across terrain, APCs, helicopters being able to survey and target. The Hezbollah has capitalized on the fact that they live in a mountainous terrain with very dramatic angles of approach and descent. And at the same time, it's also covered with trees in much of the area. Very few routes. I remember in my tank training, yours too, we went through the same unit. When you think about tank warfare or mobilized armored warfare,
deserts and open spaces.
You want to be in the open space. You want to capitalize on speed. You want to capitalize on armor. You want to capitalize on firepower. And when you're fighting in the mountains, most of that is taken away from you. All you're left with is armor, but you lack mobility.
Exactly.
Because you're traveling in a column. And when you look at, so now we understand Hezbollah is fighting in a very steep terrain. Imagine the scenes of American forces in Afghanistan in the mountains, where your enemy is far away, they're firing long-range missiles, and sometimes you see them, sometimes they're hidden. Here, add to that the fact that there are rivers at the bottom of the ravines, and there are trees covering most of the terrain, so it's very hard to see what's happening around you.
You have only a few roads that you can actually drive or go on them. So you have basically a few routes that you can use in order to attack. And you have hundreds or dozens of military vehicles, tanks that need to be on that route. And if one of them is hit, then you have basically a roadblock of hours that you're just sitting ducks, waiting to receive an RPG and a Kornet anti-tank, a Russian-made, very advanced missile from 5 kilometers or more. So just imagine the feeling of just sitting there and waiting to receive that missile from somewhere. It's not such a nice feeling.
And that goes back to the nature of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization that, with expertise, utilizes guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is what we call in military jargon asymmetrical warfare. It's never going full on against a heavier equipped and heavier armed enemy. It's always targeting them from the flank. It's always using small units that are hidden away. It's always using the element of surprise. It's always using ambushes.
It's always cheating. Not fighting by the
code of honor,
rules.
Whatever the code of honor is. So that's who they are. And I think it's also important to go through the history of Israel and Hezbollah to really understand how they were shaped as an organization. I mentioned earlier, Hezbollah was founded in 1982. And 1982 marks yet another important date in Israeli history. It's sort of the end of the first Lebanon war. Israel we suffered before that, But let's say in the early 80s, we invade southern Lebanon because of a non-stop rocket fire that's hitting much of the country.
Similar to what we have now.
Yeah, to a lesser degree, but yeah, but I mean,
places,
it was a threat to the communities of the north, where you think we're having, and again, people imagine terrorists are thinking this is homemade equipment. It was not. We're talking Russian, Soviet-made, top-of-the-line equipment at the time being fired on the cities of Israel, and we didn't have Iron Dome. We didn't have the Air Force we have today. We didn't have air superiority in the same way we did today, or technological superiority in the same degree. And Israel, under the current government back then, went in and invaded southern Lebanon. And we stayed there. So we invaded quite a few kilometers in, or quite a few miles in. And then a couple of years later, in 85, we pulled back to a security zone that we remained in all the way from the early 80s through 2000, under Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister at the time, that pulled us out. And Hezbollah is shaped as an organization, first fighting against an invading army, which is the Israeli army in the early 80s, and then in a quite rapidly growing manner, fighting against an Israeli security presence in southern Lebanon for over almost 20 years at the time.
Yeah, definitely. And so basically when you say that they are prepared for an Israeli offensive, basically the whole layers of defense of Hezbollah is built that like the long-range missiles are placed inside the heart of Lebanon so that they can keep attacking our citizens while the military is advancing on the ground. And then they have strategic locations that they have anti-tank missiles placed and waiting for the Israeli tanks or vehicles to cross a certain narrow pathway that you can only drive on that bridge or road in order to pass a mountainous area. So that's how it's planned, and it's very hard to plan an attack or an offensive against such a threat. Even though on a face-to-face combat or war, there is no match. I mean, the IDF is way stronger.
But they never get there.
Yeah, because the amount of casualties that the IDF and Israel will suffer in order to completely destroy Hezbollah is too high, and the international community will interfere because it will destabilize the region and other aspects also internally inside Israel. Mati, let's go, I think, in the head.
We're not done. Wait. So we said, so that ended in September 2000. And Assad, and this is important to remember, where do Hezbollah warriors get their capabilities and training? They spent almost 19 years fighting against the IDF while we were in Lebanon. September 2000, we leave Lebanon. Hassan Nasrallah, who was much younger back then, declares victory over the Israeli army. And he is named champion in the Muslim world of fighting against the Jewish enemy. And it's important to remember that as far as their stature goes in the Arab world, because they are the first terrorist organization, the first militia, the first army led by an Arab or Muslim to ever, in modern times, ever have any image that actually looks like victory over the Israeli army.
The Israelis withdrew from the security.
We withdrew unilaterally. We received nothing. There was no peace agreement. There was no armistice agreement. There was nothing. We just said we've had enough as a country of the constant friction for just shedding blood there for decades. We're out. And we left. And that lasted. He became smug. He became overconfident in his abilities, to the point where in 2006, the Hezbollah kidnapped first murdered and then kidnapped several Israeli soldiers, and Israel went into war in Lebanon, and it was a very bloody, second Lebanon war, 2006. Very bloody, very violent war, both for the Israeli and Hezbollah. And we dealt Hezbollah a very, very painful blow in 2006. So much so that Hassan Nasrallah, who's still the leader of Hezbollah today, came out and said, if I had known the degree of the violence the Israeli army would impose on me, I would have never gone to war.
It wasn't worth it to steal,
it wasn't worth
kidnap.
Yeah, because again, they always fight in guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is always I poke the bear, and I retreat. But when the bear comes all the way to my house and destroys it, now I have a problem because I'm not set up to fight that kind of war.
All the way. Also, just to add about Nasrallah, he's portrayed as this very huge villain, but he's hiding from Israel in a bunker for more than 20 years.
For decades,
So, and we only see him like on screens and on these trailers that he shows us.
And then, sort of to wrap up the story and bring us to today, Hezbollah sort of has this ongoing, like very low conflict, very low friction fight with Israel from the end of the Second Lebanon War all the way till today. And they slowly, as the years go, as terrorist organizations do, they gain power, they gain boldness, they slowly inch closer to the border, they slowly inch closer into the DMZ, the demilitarized areas. They slowly push out the peace observers that exist there to the point where they now...
the United Nations observers and soldiers that are supposed to keep the peace between Israel and South Lebanon.
There's several UN agencies, and now they often observe from within Israel because they're afraid to be inside Lebanon.
Exactly.
Which I find to be a little amusing.
Not very helpful.
Yeah. and then, then they gained a huge amount of military on-the-ground experience, or like, as you like to say, boots on the ground experience.
Boots on the ground experience,
Great show. Boots on the ground experience fighting on behalf of the Iranians in what I would call the sort of the aftermath of the Arab Spring. Which is fighting in the deserts of Syria, fighting within Syria in the Syrian civil war. So this is ISIS, Assad forces, Russian forces, and Hezbollah all fighting. They lost, I don't know the exact number, I don't think anyone knows, but it's thousands of fighters had died for them over there. But they also gained an immense amount of experience.
Yeah.
So this is not at all a force that has been sort of sitting at home waiting for the war. They've been actively fighting and actively training.
Yeah, and you cannot replace active experience.
Yeah.
It's a whole different level. Just imagine, like, the majority of the IDF soldiers are between the age of 18 and 21.
Yeah.
So now everybody is very experienced in fighting because of the Gaza Strip, because of Lebanon. But before that, only specific units had actual battle experience, other than the veteran units that, are formed out of old people like us, above the age of 30 and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that brings us sort of to October 7th. October 7th, we sort of opened with this. The biggest concern in Israel was that Hezbollah is the real threat. No one actually imagined that Hamas was the sort of the one and only strike. Everyone was expecting, and for good reason, was expecting Hezbollah to be the real game.
Yeah.
Hamas sort of just to be the appetizer on like what would really come afterwards. And much of the reserve forces, much of the special forces, much of the Air Force assets from the morning of October 7th were pushed up north in anticipation of a huge blow from Hezbollah.
And only then, after realizing the magnitude of what happened south, some of the forces were rerouted to the Gaza Strip, and then back to the north, and then back to the Gaza Strip, and that's what we have today. It's a game of chess, moving the pieces.
And then since that day, up until today, it's been this very calculated, very slow exchange of blows between Israeli forces and Hezbollah forces. And you mentioned the fact that Hezbollah combatants are very experienced. Some of these people have been fighting in the same village, in the same mountain range, with the same weaponry system for 25 years straight. And they're very good at operating their weapons. They're very good at using the rockets. They're very good at targeting their mortars. They're very good at targeting their anti-tank missiles.
Sadly, yeah.
Sadly.
I don't like these anti-tank missiles.
No, none of us do. And what they've done is, and they did this very well in the Second Lebanon War, and they've done it with incredible accuracy and lethality in this last session. They've been slowly targeting everything that's sort of, let's call it Lebanon-facing on the Israeli side. They've been firing rockets. They've been firing accurate anti-tank missiles every time an IDF vehicle spends enough time sort of sitting around on a ridge that faces into Hezbollah territory.
Not just an IDF vehicle.
Or civilian vehicles.
We were there, our team, just filming on the northern border with Lebanon. And at least 5 rockets or drones exploded 100 meters from us. So it's not just the IDF, it's basically anything they see. Trying to cause some damage and havoc to the Israeli communities in the north.
And it's a crazy situation when you think about it from a security perspective. Israel, for the first time ever in our history as a country, since 1948, we've given up land, and we're not able to return our citizens to their homes because of the threat of the enemies.
That's 95,000 Israeli citizens.
Something like that,
Yeah. That are displaced from their houses.
Yeah, and it's crazy because in the southern part of Israel, aside from the several communities that were hit very, very hard on October 7th and or burnt or have many houses that were destroyed. Much of the communities down south have not fully, but have had a substantial percentage of their population return home.
Yeah.
That's not the case in northern Israel.
No, definitely not. Only a few like individuals go back home on their own decision. Not like it's not a military decision, and the government is basically paying for hotels or alternative housing and schooling for all these communities and people. We met people in Eilat, which is the southernmost city of Israel, that have been staying in a hotel for 6 months with their kids, without a job. It's an enormous burden for the country economically, and also for the people personally and the families to just live like that. And the hardest thing is there is no end to this that we can see in the near future. Because it's either the IDF goes into a full-scale invasion and destroys Hezbollah physically.
At great cost.
At great cost.
At great cost, without any doubt.
Yeah. Or there is some international agreement that will force Hezbollah a few kilometers north so that they won't be right on the border with the Israeli communities and threatening the Israeli civilians. So that's the two options. It's very hard because, okay, so in order to have a good agreement in general, you need both sides to be happy, but
or slightly upset.
Yeah, just a little bit upset, definitely. So Israel wants to live here in peace. Okay, nobody wants war. I don't want war. You don't want war. The civilians don't want war. We want to have a good life, to have a good jobs, and to be happy.
Hezbollah wants the opposite.
Hezbollah does not want that.
No, they want the opposite.
They want a war. They want to destroy Israel. They want to destroy the Jewish state, and they want the Islamic Shiite ideology to spread in this region, in the Middle East, and in Lebanon. And they are funded by Iran, that wants to destroy Israel, death to Israel, and death to the United States. So Iran will keep funding Hezbollah if Hezbollah keeps doing their bidding, meaning attacking Israel and causing, war damage.
The situation up north is crazy. It's crazy in the sense that we're almost in a, I don't want to call it trench warfare, but it's become a demilitarized, or not demilitarized, decivilized region.
Both filled with military.
Only military presence is left on both the Israeli and the Lebanese side of the border. Israel has, we don't know the exact number, but let's say just under 100,000 civilians who've evacuated much of the northern cities and communities, especially the ones close to the border. And the same happened in Lebanon, where without anyone asking them to do this, entire villages evacuated their villages, knowing that war was imminent. And none of these people have come back. Hezbollah is, I mean, in great numbers, sort of, they've built themselves into the hills and the positions and the valleys of the borders of northern Israel. And the Israeli army has done the same. There's still today, almost 8 months into the war, artillery, intelligence, special forces, Lebanese or Hezbollah specific units, Air Force assets, I mean, just endless military assets that are sitting on the border on both sides waiting for things to blow up. And what's crazy is that neither side really wants to get to full blows. And that sort of goes back to how do these people operate? Israel doesn't want to invade Lebanon. Like, we've done it twice. We have no desire to repeat it. And Hezbollah doesn't want full war. They want small tactical victories. They don't want to be hit with a knockout.
Yeah, because they know that if a full-scale war will be launched, it will be their last, basically, war with Israel. Because Israel will destroy it. Of course, we will have heavy losses, but Hezbollah will be gone. And they don't want to lose their one shot at a full-scale war at this moment. They want to keep their options open, like for an instant, to have an organized attack against Israel with Houthis, with Iranian missiles, and with Hezbollah.
Well, it's because they're terrorists. Terrorists don't go to full frontal war. What they do is they want to, again, poke the bear, always cause, they want to demoralize, they want to scare, they want to seed fear in the hearts of their enemies. They want to hurt the enemies, and they've done that. Because we've evacuated people, because it's hurt the economy, because we're holding on to...
Because we have reserve units that are waiting there instead of finishing off Hamas with all of our forces.
And what's interesting here is Iran themselves have sort of held back Hezbollah. Because Hezbollah, if we compare this to sort of a game of cards, Hezbollah are the sort of the ace up the sleeve of Iran.
Yeah.
The Iranian government can never go directly against the Israeli army. They can never directly attack the American assets in the Red Sea or the Western alliance that's in the Red Sea. The Houthis can't really do that. They're aside from their weapons, we've seen sort of the level of their training in their army. Hezbollah can, and they're sort of the one ace up the sleeve of the Iranians, and they don't want to lose that sort of that card, because if they're caught bluffing, or if we call them out and say, okay, let's go.
Yeah, let's
see what you have. They lose one of the most substantial assets they have in the Middle East.
Just imagine, okay, let's make it into a practical example. So they have 150,000 rockets, but each rocket launcher is hidden super well inside a mountain, covered with trees and with bushes. But once a missile is launched, that site is compromised, and the Israeli Air Force is destroying that missile launcher. So it can only fire once. It can be 10 missiles, but one time. So if they go all out, they need to understand that they have one shot at doing that at a full scale.
Yeah.
So what they do at the moment is tactical attacks, a missile from here, moving a missile there, launching it, and then that area is destroyed, compromising another area. So they want to save face as not being afraid of Israel and as having part in this conflict between Israel and Hamas, but they don't want to lose their deterrent and ability. And another war that is involved with Hezbollah and Iran and Israel that also is not getting enough attention is the fact that Iran keeps smuggling weapons from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah.
Trying to.
Well, we know the ones that we have destroyed. I'm assuming that they still, some weapons convoys are being reached to Lebanon.
Because that's been one of the most interesting chapters in the history of Israel and Iran in recent years. Where if you look just at the headlines today, and this is exactly why we do the podcast, because the headlines don't tell the full story.
Exactly.
You look at today's headlines, it's Hezbollah, Israel, stalemate, northern Israel. But the reality is that for going on 20 years now, we've been firing like on almost a weekly basis, sending airstrikes into the Syrian desert to hit convoys of Iranian trucks heading across the desert into trying to reach Lebanon with military equipment, with missiles, with personnel, with guidance systems for their missiles. We've been killing their experts. We've been killing their generals inside Beirut, inside Syria, inside Iran, and we've been doing it again and again and again. And you mentioned this earlier. Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, has been living in hiding for decades. He very rarely shows his face in any kind of public appearance.
For good reason.
For good reason. For fear of being unalived, as we say nowadays.
We say that.
As we say on YouTube, unalived by the Israeli army. So it's this crazy stalemate, and I think we need to end with some sort of guesstimations of how things are going to play out.
Yeah.
We've been at this sort of like. It's not a stalemate, but this very slow friction, slow cooking event up north for going on 8 months now. Israel's sort of stationed on one side, Hezbollah on the other. None have sort of shown their full power. It's been one small tactical blow after the other from either side.
Artillery fire and then a response by an airstrike, some military forces of Hezbollah putting a bomb on the fence, and then Israeli drone destroys them.
They knock out our observation blimp.
Exactly.
We kill their general. It's like this tit for tat kind of thing, back and forth, again and again and again, and it's never escalated to anything that's more than that. And traditionally speaking, and I say this cautiously, the Lebanon wars break out in the summer. The weather.
Nobody wants to fight in the winter, especially not up north.
Yeah, up north it doesn't make much sense. Yeah, too muddy, too sticky, too slippery, too cold to fight in the winter.
Both sides.
We go to war in the summer, both Israel and Hezbollah, and we're entering that summer season now, and we're just about sort of in the perfect storm for that to happen. And at the same time, Israel as a country is not wanting. I'm not saying we can't, not wanting another war, but we might not have a choice.
Yeah. If you say Israel does not want war, we still have, as we said, almost 100,000 Israelis that are away from their houses, away from their schools, from their jobs. You cannot keep going like this. It's impossible. I mean, 100,000 citizens that are away from their houses. It's crazy. But let's say, okay, let's play a game. Okay, what if a war starts now? What are the scenarios that can happen?
Well, we know what Israel's done previously. And I'd say in our benefit, in the benefit of the Israeli intelligence and the military intelligence, we might have been asleep as far as Gaza is considered.
Yeah.
We underestimated Gaza. We have not been underestimating Hezbollah. We have not been underestimating their capabilities. We have not been underestimating the Iranians. According to what's already been released to the press, our country has been spending tens of billions of shekels annually
preparing for this war. Yes.
Preparing for Hezbollah, preparing for Iranian intervention in Hezbollah. We've been preparing ourselves on missile defense, on Air Force capabilities, on long-reach Air Force capabilities, as in-depth within the Syrian desert, within the Iranian desert, strikes against our enemies, and also have spent a lot of time collecting intel about what Hezbollah can do.
What will cause this war to start, Mati?
Usually a mistake.
Yeah, but
that's
what? Like accidentally they hit and succeed?
The same as what happened in Gaza. Like
that's such a mistake.
No, not on October 7th. Like the same thread of they could have planned a tactical blow. Let's knock out a command post. Let's hit this, intelligence listening or observation point.
Okay.
And then an Israeli officer is killed, or vice versa. The Israelis didn't mean to, but we hit
the son of somebody.
The son of somebody, or the father, the son, and the executive of whatever branch of, or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, or Hezbollah command.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're forced to retaliate, or were forced to retaliate, and it sort of spins out of control.
Yeah, but I think that the way that it will look, it will actually become a war. It will be if either Israel invade Lebanon or Lebanon invades Israel.
Yeah.
I think that these are basically the numbers. We can also have like hundreds of missiles being flown at us, and then we retaliate with hundreds of airstrikes, but that will not feel like an all-out war yet, because we have been doing that just on a smaller scale.
I think that's a more likely scenario than a full-out war, though. That's
missiles?
What you just described. No, let's call it long-range weapons, long-range missiles, rockets, airstrikes, versus full-on ground invasion. I think at this time it seems more likely.
Maybe a temporary ground invasion as well.
Yeah, but I mean, it makes more sense. And again, if we're learning from past lessons, it makes more sense to do a limited ground operation to push back the border, to create a security parameter, to return, let's call it, superiority in the control of any area they would be able to launch short-range weapons. So, like, be it short-range rockets, short-range artillery, or sniper fire, or anything like that. So push them back and then retreat. But we haven't seen the concentration of force on the Israeli side of a large invading force. We're not unable to do it.
We can do it very fast.
We're not saying it's off the table. The military units have trained for exactly this for a very, very long time. But I don't think we're going to instigate it ourselves.
No, but what is the potential way of happening is like the Radwan forces will enter Israel, capture an Israeli community, a city, military base, something like that.
Do you think they could do that right now?
At the moment? Well, first of all, the moment, if they would do it... I think that
moment passed.
It passed because now the whole cities are ghost towns. So if they capture a city, they're going to be alone in that city.
Yeah.
So it's not...
But once we pulled in all the reservists, all the special forces, everyone who's been trained for northern Israel, once they were on that border, their ability because they're fully based on surprise attacks.
Yes,
they're fully based on using weaknesses in your defense. And once you've sort of beefed up your defense, you don't have that many vulnerable points, and your ability to respond with power and in great numbers is much higher.
Yeah, that is correct. But they can also, put all their forces in one area and then cause a damage for a temporary time to the Israeli defense forces. And then, of course, the IDF will reorganize and, strike back and win. But that is something that they can do. They wouldn't be wise from them to do it now because we are there. We have reservists, we have units that have been patrolling, stationing, preparing for this invasion since the 8th of October. So I wouldn't say that will happen.
I don't think there's a big element that I've always been more concerned about. Is again, we need to remember Hezbollah is let's call it the military or the terrorist branch in northern Israel of the Iranians. And the expectation always was, the concern always was, or is that it's going to be an extension of something that goes wrong between Israel, Iran, America, Western Alliance, Israel, and Iran, or even a different proxy, big strike Houthis and then Iranians, and then them using Hezbollah to
They're the only ones that have a border with us. So
Who, the Hezbollah?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
unless we only
That's what I'm saying,
fight with missiles, then they're the only ones that we can have an actual
But what I'm saying
face-to-face
is
battle with.
Hezbollah right now aren't losing, and so they're in their mind they're doing well enough to call it a win.
But if you put the numbers, we neutralized hundreds of their militants leaders, and they neutralized dozens of ours. So it's like we are winning the numbers games.
No, but you said this. We're much better
Yeah.
at full-on military operations than the Hezbollah is. We're better. We've built, I mean, and this is going back almost 40 years now. We built units whose sole existence is to fight Hezbollah combatants using their own tactics against them.
Yeah.
There are special forces. This isn't secret in any way. Multiple special units in the Israeli army who are trained regularly in mountain warfare, in anti-guerrilla warfare, in counterterrorism warfare.
Bush fighting.
Yeah, I mean, we have people that know this. They've been training for years. We have reserve units who've been training for 15, 20, 25 years, every year for exactly this scenario.
On the mountains in Lebanon.
Yeah, exactly this scenario.
In the north.
So I think it'll be more of a bigger regional flare-up, we'll call it, that spins out of, or spirals out of control. That's my sense.
Yeah, well, what's the next step? I mean, what's gonna happen? It's like we're gonna stay like this forever if we don't initiate or they don't initiate.
We might, and I mean, think about it. It's been since 1982. Hezbollah's still with us.
Yeah.
We're still with them. Both of us are here to the same degree, and unless something very dramatic happens in the region, I think as a whole, we're not going to enter in with the attempt or the desire to take over a substantial portion of Lebanon again.
But listen, Lebanon is a country. Why doesn't it have the ability to battle this terrorist organization that is inside it?
Now we're going back to previous conversations where the result of, so we talked about their military success, but we always forget, or I think people forget, we don't forget, people forget that the outcome of radical Islam and the outcome of terrorism coming from that world and that mind view is always destruction of nations, of countries, of economies, of lives of the people from within which they operate. And Lebanon is exactly that. Lebanon was an incredible country, a country where people aspire to live in, that has become the dumping grounds of this part of the Middle East. It's lost territory. It's been sort of over.
The currency is basically super weak now.
Yeah, the currency has been devalued multiple times. The country defaulted on their loans to international entities. They've been taken over to a certain degree by Hezbollah. The Hezbollah, was responsible for an enormous explosion within
Beirut, right?
Within Beirut, within their capital
huge.
city. They're responsible for assassinations, both against political adversaries and others. They have flare-ups of clan warfare within the country. So they've really they brought that country down on every possible aspect, and they've destabilized not just that country. Most of the Middle East has been destabilized by Iranian influence. Look at the countries around us: Yemen, Iraq now, through the faction fighting over there. You have Lebanon, Syria, ISIS interference. Egypt's been hurt by it.
Yeah, Egypt is also struggling.
And Israel itself. We're all hurting from Iranian, and I'll call it radical Islamic destabilization forces in this region. And it is, Douglas Murray says this beautifully. He says, these people are a cult of death, and the fruit of all their actions is death and destruction. There's no two ways about it. It's very, very clear.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I would like to take it to this again. So we said it's a cult of death.
Yeah.
But this is a spiritual battle.
100%.
It's a spiritual battle. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. That's the only reason that I can make any sense of all these wars and all this money that is invested against attacking Israel. We're a small country. All we want to do is make peace and have economic ties and, advance and be better. And then all they want is basically to wage war, to destabilize, to destroy, to send their young children to battles, to die, and doesn't make any sense unless I look at it from biblical or spiritual eyes.
Yeah.
And if we're talking biblical, I don't know if this can be the fire that ignites, a biblical proportion war in the Middle East, but it might, because if Israel launches a full-scale war against Hezbollah, which is the ace in the Iranian sleeve, then Iran will have to back its #1 fighter in this region. And if Iran does that, then other players will join in, and then it can explode and ignite a whole Middle East war.
Well, you can take this in two directions. You could take it into a place of fear and doubt, and you can use the fact that we know that we're still living in a biblical story, very much so. We forget sometimes, but we're still living in a biblical story where the enemies of our God are trying to destroy us and everything we believe in. And the followers of our God are fighting for what's right and what was promised to us. And so far, and in the foreseeable future, and in every day that's going to come in the future, we know that our God will prevail. And you talk about the spiritual element of it. Our existence, our prosperity, our success, and more importantly, our hope, our joy, are an enemy of their faith. And they see it as that. The fact that we live in this country with a smile on our face and hope in our hearts is proof of the deceit of their faith.
While being attacked every day for
proof,
more than 6 months.
It is proof of the fact that what we believe in is true to the core. And what they believe in is destructive and untrue to the core. And that it really is like, and we talked about this many times, we really still are in a battle of biblical magnitude. Where it's a people that are saying our God, these people's God is our enemy, and we will fight against them. And we say the same thing. What you believe in is against everything we believe in. So it gives me incredible hope to know that we're in God's story, because I know that God's always been faithful. Through and through, every time, every day. It's just very hard to see on a daily basis because we live a human existence that's limited in its scope and understanding. But God's been faithful, and faith truly comes only when, and this is important, when you live in tension, when your reality is in tension with what you expect in life. And we're there. We live in a tension that has fear, it has doubt in it, it has elements of concern that should concern every normal person, every healthy person.
Yeah, to the point that you cannot live.
Yeah.
But somehow, we keep on smiling, we keep developing. And the thing that I think really brings me hope is the more brutal our enemies become, the IDF and the people of Israel still have humanity that is guiding them, still treat and does everything possible not to harm the civilians in this conflict, while the enemy is doing the exact opposite. And so I think that in every hard situation, you can find, God's love. And if you look at Israel fighting all these enemies throughout history, and especially also now because it's in the news and it's in your face all the time, you can see that God's love is seen here in this conflict, in the state of Israel, and how we deal with our enemies, with the civilians of our enemies in this war.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard, it's encouraging, but we need to take the good part out of it. I don't know, I like to see and to look at the glass half full in this situation.
No, it always is. And I'd say there's more to it than that. I mean, we live in a reality here that doesn't allow us to be detached from the biblical story. And it doesn't allow us to just think that everything's going to work itself out in our own power and in our own ability. And I think that's a good place to be personally, and it's a good place to be as a nation. To know that there's several elements to this. First, to be at peace internally, knowing that God is sovereign and God is in control. And then the second part is living in a faith that is within tension with reality. Because if your faith is not tested, it's not faith. It's just fact.
Yeah, definitely.
But we have to believe that better things are ahead of us, better things are to come, and the promises that were promised will happen in this land, and they have so far. So we have no reason to doubt God's promise in the future. And I'd say there's also a message of clarity and hope for other people here, where anyone around the world who's watching this can see that there still is good in the world, and there still is evil in the world. And more importantly, if you hold on as a people to a goal that is mandated by God, to an end game that is the right end game, it changes your everyday reality in a positive way. We're still in a situation that should be hopelessness, in a situation that should trigger only revenge and anger and hatefulness. You still can find virtue, still can find happiness, still can find compassion, still can find empathy, because if you're connected to the right story as a people, you go in the right direction. And I think that's really where we should be emotionally. That's where we should be historically. That's where we should be narrative-wise in our lives.
Yeah. And in general, if you guys feel connected to what is happening in Israel and you want to help us in this battle, in this spiritual battle, please join us in prayer. Pray for the IDF soldiers. Pray for all the civilians that are affected by this conflict, by these terrorist organizations here. And keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Okay, this is something that God told us to do. But how do you pray for the peace of Jerusalem? It sounds so vague and big. Think of an Israeli soldier. Think of an Israeli town. Just Google the situation there. Make it personal. Have a personal connection with the people of Israel, with the people of this region, and then pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And we know we are serving an awesome God, and He has a big plan. We don't have all the answers now, which makes it also interesting, hopeful, and like kind of mysterious. But I think it's the cool thing about following God is it's never boring.
No.
It's never boring, and you know that you have something that is bigger than you every step of the way, because it's not about us. I mean, if it was about us, it would be depressing, like there is no future, but somebody has the answer, and that's God, and it's great to follow Him. Any last words, Mati?
No, I think there's a clear call to action here for anyone who's watching this show, to make sure they go deep with the story of what's happening here in the world. How do I say this in a clear way? There's a reason, both biblical, both spiritual, both historical, both financial, both geopolitical, for everything that happens in this part of the world. And to understand that angle, you need to understand what happens here. That's why we're really here.
Yeah.
And I need to say this in all honesty. The reason we're here, and I'll say this to our viewers at home, the reason we're able to continue to create stories, the reason we're able to continue to report on a daily basis, specifically Yair, is because of the views, because of the shares, because of the subscription, and because of the support of people at home watching this content, sharing this content, and donating to it. So if you care about what happens here and you want to see more of it, please spend just 1 minute sharing it, subscribing to it, or making a small donation to make sure this content continues to come out of Israel, Jerusalem, and to anyone around the world who needs to hear what happens here.
Yeah, definitely. Mati, it was very interesting to talk to you about this topic. And I think it's a very important topic to understand more than just the tiny headlines that we see. Hezbollah is attacking. This is a huge organization. It's the biggest terrorist organization in the world today. And Israel is battling this threat.
Yeah.
But we know we're in good hands. And it's good to talk to you.
You
and
too,
I guess
always.
It was a pleasure to be with all of you back at home. Please send us your comments. If you have any requests, ideas for other topics that Mati and I can discuss here, please send it to us, and keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org.